Hello and welcome to Tools in the Shed, a podcast powered by CarsGuide, ready to rip into car stuff that's caught our eye this week. I'm CarsGuide Deputy Editor James, and with me is Deputy News Editor Justin.
Hello.
And Staff Journalist Tom.
Hey.
This week we're looking at half-price heroes, affordable used alternatives for the new cars you want. We'll run our eye over some recent entrants to the CarsGuide garage, and we'll check in with an unexpectedly sharp billionaire movie critic in this week's MuskWatch, so stay with us. But first of all, we have had some feedback, and last week we were talking about the best SUVs coming for 2021. We picked a half a dozen. Greg Burville had a comment. We touched on Mitsubishi at one point, said he loves the podcast, but he had to correct us on Mitsubishi's 10-year warranty. And Justin, this is one I think you're well placed to comment on.
Yes.
So if you have your new Mitsubishi serviced by a third party, you get a 5-year, 100,000 kilometre warranty. Authorised Mitsubishi dealer, you get 10 years, 200,000. I think he's 100% correct, isn't he?
Yeah, that's right. So the standard warranty, so to say, hasn't changed. It's still 5 years, 100,000 kilometres. The only difference is if you take Mitsubishi up on their offer for 10 years of cap price servicing, which is a new program as well, you can get up to 10 years / 200,000 kilometres of warranty, whichever comes first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's not your traditional standard. Well, it's not a standard warranty at all. It's an extended warranty with conditions attached to it. So yeah, you just got to service it through Mitsubishi using cap price servicing, and you can get 10 years.
Which is interesting. I think, as we were touching on last week, the number of 10-year-old cars that you had seen in an authorised dealership being serviced, they'd be thin on the ground. So it is just trying to keep that service throughput in their dealer network, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And one other interesting thing about it is a transferable warranty too. So assuming that you bought that car as new, and let's say you're 5 years in and you've been servicing it through Mitsubishi as part of the cap price servicing, and you do move to sell it, that second owner can then take up the next 5 years of warranty again, so long as they continue to service it through Mitsubishi.
Brings a whole new meaning to making sure that you got logbooks, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I mean,
yes,
10 years warranty sounds pretty appealing, but yeah, obviously you've got to do certain things to actually get it in the first place.
Yeah, because there's often a kind of urban myth that if you don't have your car serviced at the dealership, you'll void your warranty, which is not true. So long as you have your car serviced and by a recognised service outlet and the book is stamped and whatever, typically warranty will be recognised. But yeah, it's pretty compelling, and we'll see how it goes. Peter Crott said Richard, who was with us in the podcast last week, forgot about the best-selling Ford SUV when he was saying that they basically have none besides the new Puma. It's the Escape, of course, and it's a car, new model coming soon, and he said pretty sure that's worth a mention. And Bertie came in and said, Escape, the Pina Colada song, which is technically the name for Rupert Holmes' song, The Pina Colada, and those on YouTube will see some vision of what I discovered is an incredibly daggy guy who sang that song. I always expected some kind of smooth-voiced Lothario. He's definitely not that. Reminds me of Kenny Everett, for those old enough to remember him. And DeCool came in and said it was at last year's Frankfurt show where he saw it. Stylish, practical, pity it's so delayed, but mail is it's this month. We'll be staring down the launch of that car, and with a plug-in hybrid option as well. So it's going to be a really interesting offering.
Yeah, Escape's incredibly important for Ford, particularly given the recent success of RAV4 hybrid. I mean, I know it's plug-in versus self-charging, but still, having that hybrid mid-size SUV option in your lineup is pretty important. But unlike RAV4, though, with Escape, off the top of my head, I believe it's only one plug-in hybrid variant, and it's a flagship one too. So you're talking about a near $60,000 car. So it's not as if you have that breadth of a hybrid range that Toyota does in terms of having something more affordable.
Well, and the taste for plug-in just isn't there still. We look at the numbers every month, and it's just plug-in hybrid variants don't even register. Yes.
I mean the non-plug-in hybrid, the kind of engine doing the work and what have you, seems to be the more palatable stepping stone at this point. I think you're right. But for what it's worth, I really like a plug-in hybrid. I think I'm at that point where that seems like a really good next step. But anyway, that's just me.
It's a really tough one, isn't it? Because like, how do you convince people of that? I understand that, it seems like you've got one foot in one technology and one foot in the other, and and they're expensive, which doesn't help. But yeah, every time I drive one, I enjoy it. And there are really, really notable benefits. Like, with I think I had a Hyundai Ioniq last year, and that was the plug-in hybrid version. You could get almost like 1,200 Ks of range before you needed to refuel if you had a full battery and full tank of fuel. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But the thing is with plug-in hybrids, and this is where plug-in hybrid owners, current ones, struggle as well, is actually remembering to charge the battery. Because it's so easy to get in, right? Pick it up from the dealership with a full battery, and let's say it gives you that 30 to 50 Ks of electric only range, which is typical at the moment. Once that's depleted, you're back on the engine again, and you're no different to any other internal combustion car until you charge it. And so you have to get into that habit, because unlike a full EV where you can't drive it if it's not charged, plug-in you can.
Great point.
Which is why I think Toyota's solution at the moment is great for right now, because it's foolproof. You don't have to think about it. It is self-charging. And in terms of real-world fuel economy, in terms of people actually using it for its intended purpose, you're probably better off just driving a regular hybrid at the moment, even though a plug-in has better capability, but people just aren't harnessing that capability at the moment.
You definitely are, and that brings up another one I drove recently, the Mercedes-Benz GLC 300e. I couldn't charge it because the Type 2 to Type 2 charging cable, which I would have needed to charge it at my local shopping centre, is a $500 and something extra part.
Option.
So yeah, and it didn't come with our press car, so I had nowhere to charge it because I've just got a unit parking spot. So. The problem became you're actually lugging around the battery. So the fuel usage is terrible if you just drive it around on the engine all the time. You really, really, really do need to charge them.
Great point. Yeah. Now, Stewie GB coming at us from New Zealand, which automatically means he's a great bloke. He says, love your work, as always, team. It's his default lawn mowing podcast. So that's nice to know. He's out there cutting the grass and listening to us. And he's noticed some significant differences in vehicle prices between Australia and New Zealand. And he calls out the Hilux SR5 4x4 Auto. It's just under 54 grand in New Zealand, but it's just under 64 grand in Australia. So that's interesting. And the SR5 Cruiser, similar to the Rogue, is 58,990, so nearly 59 grand. It's $74,000 in Australia. Yet the other way round, the Kia Sorento is between 60 and just under $80,000 in New Zealand, and it's 47 to, let's call it, 65 in Australia. And he says that's odd. But I suppose it's just like any foreign market. There are going to be different regimes of import duty. There could be locally levied taxes and what have you. And the spec may vary a little bit as well. But still, they're pretty solid differences, I've got to say, for just a trip across the Tasman.
Yeah, I guess it's never going to be apples for apples with that type of thing. I mean, I quite often look at the US market and how cheap a 911 is there. Like I think it's like 70,000 Australian dollars or something like that. But again, they're not equivalent because we might pay 250,000 Australian dollars in Australia. But again, there are all the taxes and all that kind of stuff, import and what have you to consider. So it's hard to compare, really.
Yeah, it is. I mean, a general rule of thumb, sometimes those premium cars in the States are roughly half the price of Australia. It's about half, yeah.
And I'd say as well, you're in New Zealand, you have access to a giant catalogue of really cool Japanese domestic stuff.
Oh yeah, the grey market was humming there in the 90s. There are a lot of great cars, you're right. You find yourself just car spotting left, right and centre in New Zealand. There's so much interesting stuff out there on the roads. Now, Brian Kay came at us and said and challenged our contention that the Everest wasn't comfortable. He says, an Everest isn't comfortable, reality detached. He said he bought one because they're so comfortable. His wife has severe sciatica and couldn't sit in any vehicle for more than an hour or so without lots of back pain until they climbed into the Everest. And he says he rarely responds to anything online, but this can't go on challenged. BS first class. Yep, Senior Bob, those blokes should not comment on something they obviously know nothing about. And we'll get to Senior Bob shortly. He gave us some fairly pointed feedback a little later. But then Brian Kay says sorry for all the typos, and that's okay, Brian, so long as we get the message. Then Senior Bob's first comment was along similar lines. Everest is based on a ute, so it's not comfortable. Nah, only the front half is Ranger, the rear has coils, and of course he's right. He says, duh, and it's very comfortable. He had a 2016 titanium, 4 new cars ago, so he obviously cycles through the cars pretty quickly. Noosa to Sydney, 10 hours and a bit, with 3 stops for my little dog to pee. All caps, very comfy. Everest is brilliant, but bring on the Bronco, please. I would just like to read a quote from a CarsGuide journalist reviewing the Everest Titanium in April 2020. Could be me, saying, weighing in at 2,446 kilograms, the Everest Titanium is a big bus, and if you're coming out of a conventional car, be prepared to feel that mass behind the wheel. In that context, it'll feel a bit wobbly and bumpy, but relative to other large mainstream 7-seat SUVs, the Everest sits near the top of the pyramid for ride comfort. So I'm just putting it out there. And various other authors on CarsGuide have recognised that the Everest is pretty good in terms of the comfort. So maybe we're a bit off target last week. Thank you very much for the feedback to those guys. Now, in general, Hammer Rocks has come at us on the naming of cars. We touched on this briefly too. And he says Raptor, Wildtrack, Rugged X, Rogue, Warrior, Thunder, Storm, and there's actually a Mako Hilux in New Zealand. He gets why these macho names are out there. It's to be masculine. You want apex predators to be, on your cars, etc. And something that sounds cool. But he's drawn more to Japanese names from times past, like the Nissan Fairlady and the Sylvia and Cedric and Gloria, of course, which all of those put me in mind of a Noel Coward play every time I hear those. But Subaru, of course, with their last ute in Australia, was called the Brumby. And he is pushing for a Hilux Wombat, a Ranger Bilby, a Navara Quokka, a DMax Black Emu, or a Triton Bandicoot. And he says, come on, car marketing departments, be brave. And I reckon that'd be amazing. Because you've also got the Platypus, Wallaby, Echidna, on it goes, to play with as well. I think it's kind of out there, but I reckon there's some legs in that.
Wasn't the Isuzu MUX in Japan at one point called the Multiple Utility Wizard, or something to that effect? Right.
Well, invariably those names do have some kind of obscure meaning.
Yeah, I don't know. I seem to remember something like that. I'm sure someone in the comments will correct me, but maybe it was a slightly different model, but it had a ridiculous name at one point. So got to be careful what you wish for when it comes to the Japanese market.
MR2 was initially midship runabout 2-seat specialty. That's where MR2 comes from. But it'd be good to get people's thoughts on whether we should go Aussie fauna for some car names and see if you're on board with Hammer Rocks. Bertie said, I like the idea of a Tesla Model 3 once the feds provide some incentives, of which there are none at the moment. He's absolutely right in Australia. However, Musk's attitude to COVID-19 and his views on vaccinations tempered my interest, which leads us to Senior Bob's second piece of feedback. And he said, stick to cars. You blokes are good at it, but you have no idea what's happening with COVID-19. Musk knows. Have a look at Craig Kelly, who, for those outside of Australia, is a federal coalition MP, sometimes outspoken on these matters, on Facebook. And he told us about a Lancet article that was withdrawn, and I believe it was dealing with the efficacy or otherwise of hydroxychloroquine. He adds that we'll be watching Trump win the US election easily, and then a lot of the narrative that we have swallowed will be unravelled. And he talked about the CDC, which is the US Centre for Disease Control, had to withdraw their claim that over 200,000 people had died of COVID-19 in the US and revised that down to 9,000. So that's an interesting fact. Thank you, Senior Bob. And he says, again, stick to cars. Our political comments make us look stupid and ignorant. And I would say we don't need political views to do that, Bob. That's kind of a given. That's cost of entry for this podcast. But
hey, guys. Producer here. Just really quick note out there for anyone, unlike Senior Bob, who is interested in these guys' political opinions. Stay tuned for our upcoming political podcast, Tools in the Senate. Cheers, guys.
But But Senior Bob says, I do enjoy your show every Friday. Stick to cars, boys. But according to Brian Kay, we don't know much about that either, so I don't know where to go. But Stewie GB said, Senior Bob, you need to lay off the drugs, Chief, in response on YouTube. So that was Stewie's thoughts. Adam Gill says, Elon for a knighthood. And now this name, I'm going to crush this. Bayudiki Wijaya Tilake says, what a waste of time. The title says top 6 SUVs we can't wait for, and they talk BS. And look, all I'd say is, welcome to the shed, friend. That's what's happening here. So don't be surprised. But we will now move on to our major topic for discussion this week, which is a story that was authored by Byron Matthew Darkus, and regular viewers or listeners of the podcast will recognise Byron's name. And it's about half-price heroes, affordable used alternatives for the new cars you want. So he's dealt with 4, in fact. The current RAV4 hybrid, Isuzu DMax, just released new model, Mazda 2, and the Ford Focus ST. So the basic premise being, we've all been in lockdown in various, in parts of Australia for sure, and thinking about the cars that we'd like to buy, but maybe the budget isn't there. What about something that does the same job in the used car market for half the price? And it is a really interesting premise. And the first one is the RAV4 hybrid, and he's coming up with a really interesting alternative, which is, I believe, the Mazda CX5 Skyactiv, which would be from 2012 to 2017. What do you guys make of that? So if the RAV4 is from 37,000 to about 46,000, a used CX5 diesel is 16 to 22 and would have under 100,000 kilometres on the clock. Does that seem like a reasonable match up to you guys?
I think it's an interesting choice to go diesel. I think that's going to get people in the comments section riled up. But then, look, the petrol car is good too, and I'm sure you know the prices wouldn't be wildly different. It's probably a little bit cheaper for a diesel, if anything. But
I think
it's a nice match up with the
hybrid thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get the comparison for the diesel versus hybrid in terms of being lower fuel economy versus a petrol. But I guess the irony is the hybrid does its best work in the city, where it's basically electric only most of the time, whereas a diesel doesn't do its best work in the city. You know, you're really going to reap the benefits of having a diesel car like a CX5 when you're out on the highway, which is where the RAV4 doesn't do its best work. So yeah, it's an interesting comparison. I understand why it's been made, but yeah, in terms of purchase price, I mean, for a CX5 Skyactiv D, you're looking for a 2012 to 2017 model, you're looking between about 16 to 22 grand versus 37 to 46 for a brand new RAV4. So, you know, in terms of value, it's a pretty compelling proposition, particularly with prices going up for new cars, including the RAV4 recently had a pretty significant price rise of about $1,300. So, you know, CX5's not a bad second-hand option, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think part of the premise that Byron's putting out there is that it's probably a better proposition than it may have been in the past, because cars are proving to be much more reliable and durable than they may have once been. So you're still taking a pretty big knock in terms of the price. Once you drive off the showroom, you're taking a knock in depreciation. But the car itself, even with a few kilometres on the clock, is still going to be reliable and in pretty good shape. So I think that's part of the premise he's making.
Yeah, I guess an important point for all of these ones as well is if you were to buy a half-price hero, to make sure that you've got a full service history and you know exactly what's going on, because I guess for the CX5 you'd be expecting it to be pretty reliable, but you want to make sure you're getting a good one, of course.
Yes, he gives an honourable mention to the 2014 to 18 Subaru Forester as well as being another alternative, and that was popular for a reason.
But maybe not so much in the fuel usage department, and that particular one you do have to service every 6 months, which is pretty annoying.
That's true.
That's a good point.
That's true. I know that the response typically about short service intervals is we want to make sure that the car's reliable in the long term. So to Justin's point, if it has been serviced regularly, I suppose your chances of it being reliable are increased.
Yeah, well, if it's a 2014 Subaru Forester, I mean, how many times has it been serviced already if they've stuck to the schedule?
About 12.
A lot. Yeah, a lot. Yeah, the oil's going to be fresh, put it that way. Now then, the next example is the recently released Isuzu DMax, now specifically a 4x4 and a crew cab in X-Terrain mode. Now that's a nearly $63,000 car before you put it on the road, and we've found it to be a really terrific option, and it's done well in terms of our comparison testing and what have you on and off the road. But Byron's putting up for half that money, half price hero, $30,000 to $35,000. You can get a 2018 to 2020 Mitsubishi Triton 4x4 double cab GLX. Now that's a pretty young car. That'll be under 5,000 kilometres. That's a pretty solid whack of depreciation and not a bad option for that money. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, absolutely. The X-Terrain at the moment has quite a long waiting list. So, it is a car that is well and truly in demand, obviously being new, but that kind of flagship variant has proved quite popular thus far. So when you look at a Triton GLX Plus, that's only potentially from this year, that's half the price, under 5,000 Ks. It's a pretty good truck as it is anyway, and that's fairly ridiculous value. And I might suggest, going back to what we were talking about earlier, if it's going to be under 5,000 Ks, you might wait just a few more months and you might be able to snag one that's qualified for the 10-year warranty, and you could be up and away, with a $35,000 Triton with less than 5,000 Ks and potentially 10-year warranty if you service it through Mitsubishi. So that's a fairly compelling offer yet again.
Yeah, I suppose so. I wonder if the warranty will drive up used values somewhat. Once you've got that on board, it's a better proposition still.
I really agree with this. The whole Triton thing. I was looking at the prices of utes a little while ago because a family friend was buying one, and Tritons are so undervalued. Like Hiluxes, especially in this COVID time, like the prices have all gone up for a lot of used vehicles. Hiluxes are way overvalued at the moment, but Tritons, they just haven't seemed to have experienced the same surge in used car prices. So I think just generally, this generation's a fantastic truck to drive, but even the one before it is really similar in the way it drives. It just lacks all the safety stuff, but it's still a great truck. So, if you are looking for a Hilux, don't rule out a Triton, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Triton is among the big name utes, it's the most value packed, So again, if you're going second hand and we're only talking potentially 2 years back, you're getting a pretty ripping deal, to be honest.
Definitely. And I mean, the Triton has a pretty hard-won reputation for reliability and durability, particularly if you're after a hard-working workhorse. There's that. It's pretty compelling. And an honourable mention to the 2016 to 2019 Holden Colorado. And I think anything with a Holden badge is probably pulled back a bit in terms of its asking price. So that's another good option. Now, we then move to the Ford Focus ST. Very much a hot product, and with good reason. But to own one, you're at nearly $45,000 before you've put it on the road. So you get all that goodness, but that's a reasonable check that you're going to sign off on to acquire that car. Byron's put it out there that a 2016 to 2018 Peugeot 308 GTI with under 60,000 kilometres on its clock will be between $22,000 and $30,000. So it's at the lower end, half the price of that ST. And it's not an old car. It's got plenty of raps in terms of its dynamic performance. Where do we stand on that one?
I love this. I absolutely love this comparison. I mean, the Focus ST is a great car, and at 45 grand new, it's still a lot of money, obviously. But in terms of a half price hero alternative option, the 308 GTI is a cracking car. Obviously, people will have certain concerns about owning one, but even at potentially 22 grand, again, with a full service history and all that, you might have to pay a little bit more in terms of maintenance and what have you. But pushing that to a side, great car to drive. You could do worse.
Yeah, too true. And I mean, Peugeot has such a back catalogue and such a history in terms of hot hatches and, the 308 in particular. Yeah. Tom?
I'd say don't tell people about good to drive French cars because they're awesome and they're always cheap and undervalued. And I love this car. I actually recently drove a GT line, and even that was good. And that has the base engine. And you think about how old the 308 is now, like it's relatively ancient. And it still drives so well. It has such a competitive ride. It has such a competitive feel behind the wheel. Like the steering is excellent. The chassis is excellent. All the engines are pretty good too. And look, it might cost you a little bit extra service here and there because the parts probably do have to come from Europe or something. But look, they're super fun to drive. So just please don't tell people about them so that they go.
I mean, the Focus ST is out of Germany anyway, so there's probably equivalency there. And Byron finished up his little couple of pars on the 308 saying pure joy. So it was only a few weeks ago on the podcast that we were talking about brands that were possibly on the edge in Australia. And Peugeot does suffer a little bit in terms of depreciation, but there's an opportunity for people who want their half-price Euro.
One other thing about the GTI, the 308 that is so appealing is you can't buy one new anymore. If you really want to get into it, then you would be looking at a used option and potentially cross-shopping it against something like a new Focus ST or the honourable mention, which we'll get to right now, I'm sure.
Which is a Golf GTI, 2013 to 2017. So that's going to be, a Golf 6, I would have thought. Oh, it's a Golf 7. Golf 7, because then we got to 7.5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's right.
So there you go, some good options at the half-price hero level. And then we get to the little car. So a Mazda 2 G15 is from $21,000 to $26,000. So it was facelifted late last year. It's got a lot going for it, obviously. New model. It's very attractive, economical, reliable, all those things. Byron's putting up a 2017 to 2019 Suzuki Swift. And there you're looking at $12,000 to $15,000 for an under 60,000 kilometre example. And I don't know about you guys, I always see the Suzuki Swift as the quiet achiever of the small car market. It's such a quality package, and yet it doesn't get the headlines. It's really a great car, and that seems like a terrific half-price alternative in that equation.
Yeah, this is another good one for sure, I think. I mean, the Swift is not only great to drive, but in terms of value, again, we're only talking about a car that's potentially as far back as 2017. So you're looking at something that's probably in warranty for 12 to 15 grand. And, you got things like sat-nav potentially, depending on what variant you go for. So you're not missing out on all that much, I don't think, and getting something that's going to put a smile on your face. So it's a pretty good option.
Yep.
Yeah, last year we singled out the GL Navi with the safety pack as the best value car in Australia under 20 grand. And I think if you were to pick up a 2019 model year one of those with a couple of Ks on it, it would be an amazing value car. And it's not even bad to drive. It's kind of fun to drive. Everything.
It's got some dynamic ability, definitely chuckable. And if you can find a driven to church on Sunday example, it would be a steal, for sure. And the honourable mention goes to another great option, a 2017 to 2020 Kia Picanto. And I'm not alone in having a real soft spot for that car. I'm a big Kia Picanto fan, so that is another great option.
Yeah, I love the Picanto. I reckon it's a great car to drive again in terms of being such a small package, and I imagine prices for a 2017 Picanto would be quite attractive, particularly comparing it against a new Mazda 2. But at the same time, I don't know if I'd want to be hit by a bus in a Picanto, but that's a story for another day.
Well, that's where pure physics takes over. So yes,
exactly.
You'd have to be careful in that regard, but that's going to be for any car of that stature, not just the Kia.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and it is quite interesting that Kia is just committing to bringing a city car here. I mean, what's your only other option in that segment is Suzuki Ignis, I guess.
Yeah.
But the Picanto is better equipped than that car, and even if you bought one that's mentioned there, 2017 to 2020, it'd be well under warranty still. So.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that's the Kia warranty factor, isn't it? So yeah, lots of good options there, and it'd be great to get people's thoughts on other alternatives, maybe for those four, or some other half-price hero equations that have been on your mind. Good to get your feedback. But we will now, thank you guys, we'll now move to our own garage and cars that have been inside it. And Justin, notwithstanding the fact that Melbourne has been under some pretty strict COVID lockdown measures, you're in a Passat and you have been using it, but maybe you can give us an update on how it's going.
Yeah, so living in stage 4 restrictions in Melbourne means since I was last on the podcast, I'm still driving the Passat because I haven't gone anywhere other than the shops and back. But I did talk about it last time in detail, but I will mention one thing this time around, which I found quite interesting. So the Passat I've got is a 140 TSI business in fleet white, right? So it is as much of an executive car as you could imagine. But the really interesting thing I found in Victoria, Victoria Police, quite a few of the cars they have on fleet at the moment are Passat 140 TSI businesses in white, marked and unmarked. So what I found in the near 3 months now that I've spent in this one car is it gets quite a bit of attention from people that know what to look out for, so to say. And I've had a few looks of people assuming that I might be an officer of the law, which obviously I'm not. But a few concerned motorists all of a sudden slowing down or exercising more caution than they used to. But the funniest encounter I had was pulling out of the supermarket car park. A gentleman was walking towards the car, and he was most certainly under the influence of alcohol or perhaps something else, and that probably was the least of his problems. But the second he saw the car, he started charging at it, ready to kick the door in and everything. He was furious the second he saw it. Anyway, there was obviously no altercation or anything like that because I was driving at the time and there was no trouble at all. But as soon as he saw it, he absolutely went for it. So
this person thought it was a police car.
That's what I gather. Yeah. The second he was walking calmly, as I came out of the car park, I looked to the right and I saw him, and he was walking calmly. But the second he looked up and saw it, he completely changed. Like I said, I'm almost certain that he was under the influence of probably several things, and not the least of his problems. But he was not happy. That's for sure.
Extraordinary. It's a little window into the life of a person in the police, isn't it?
I had a similar problem when I had a Valken. It was a very unmarked looking Valken, and it was quite annoying when you're on the freeway because as you sort of come up behind people, they just slow down. And stuff like that, people would watch out for it, and it was quite funny.
I've often thought how hilarious it must be for police who during the day drive in this magical environment where everybody is incredibly well behaved. They obey every road rule. Then they get in their own car and drive home, and it's complete mayhem.
Absolutely.
the two worlds.
And to Tom's point, having not driven on a freeway or anything for 3 months, I'm really keen to finally be able to drive on a freeway because I want to see basically the Red Sea part. I want people to be getting out of my lane. I want them to be slowing down so I can overtake them. And I go, this is why I'm in an unmarked police car.
You're not tempted to do the full impersonation and get, the light you can put on the dash and all that stuff?
It is tempting, and I have made that joke with a few people before, but I don't think it's worth the actual trouble.
Highly illegal. All right, well, that's good. Thank you for that anecdote, Justin. And Tom, we'll move to yourself. You've been in a car that's not necessarily a brand new model, but it's been in interesting company as well.
It's been around for a long time. It was a Ranger Wildtrak. And the reason I had it is it was being pitched up into a comparison test against two the newest utes on the scene, the BT50 and the Isuzu DMax. So keep an eye out for that. There'll be a review, off-road, on-road, everything hosted by Matt Campbell and Marcus Kraft. So just keep an eye out for that on the site. It's going to be really good. It was a lot of fun to film. But yes, I had the Ranger for the week leading up to that, just to have a drive of it, and I was sort of the third driver on that test. The thing that amazes me about it is so little has changed, but it is still so good. Like everything about that ute, even when you compare it to newer utes, is you hop in and you go, okay, well, this is this is nice, but the Ranger is still just as competitive, if not better, in some areas, and that's just amazing to see for a product that's that old, and a product that, and it's going to have to be, because we know the PX has to continue for quite a while until it's replaced by the Volkswagen Allied platform thing that Ford will be doing in the future. So it'll be interesting to see if they do some sort of heavy facelift or something to keep it even more competitive. Not much has changed for the 2021 model year. I think they did a recent update or something where it's got an automatic roller cover, which was quite cool. So it's got like a little waterproof button in the tray, and that it's a fully automated roller cover.
Nice. Yeah.
And there's like new alloy wheels and maybe a few small other things, but it hasn't changed much. And to, still be so competitive on and off the road in terms of comfort, in terms of spec, in terms of like the interior trim is a big one that's usually a killer for a lot of dual cabs. Is you can tell the areas where it's just like, nah, this is a commercial vehicle, but in the Ranger it's much less that. It's much more, well, this is like a passenger car.
Well, it was at the leading edge of that transition, really, from workhorse to much more livable proposition. So ahead of the curve, but still looking good on that score, obviously.
And just some mail on the next Ranger, Tom. I believe at the moment that it's scheduled to be revealed at the very end of next year. Could even be on sale at the end of next year, but at the latest, early 22, it'll be in showrooms. That's the current plan. So a little bit longer that it's going to stick around, and it has been around for a while, but a new model which presumably is going to move the game forward even more, is around the corner, so to say.
Well, that's right, and it becomes the Amarok too, So
yes, exactly. Yeah. That's right.
Although there is like a trade-off worth considering, because now that the BT50 has moved on to that DMax platform, it now has less power and torque than it did before.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if the Ranger can keep its luster when it shares a lot of stuff with Volkswagen. And it's not to say the Amarok isn't a good truck, and it's not to say that when you put the two most comfortable trucks together in that segment, you got on the one end you got the most powerful with that 580 V6, and on the other end you got one of the most comfortable and most like a passenger car in the segment. I wonder what happens when you blend them together, and a lot of people are probably thinking that, but I also wonder what will be compromised. Will either of them lose their luster?
Yes.
Well, it's a good point, actually, because the Amarok, I don't know how much say Volkswagen's going to have in what it got, kind of like BC50 and DMax, right? All Mazda did was put a different front end and some slightly different interior treatments and a different tailgate on the DMax. Otherwise, it is a DMax. There's no changes mechanically, so to say. So I suspect it's probably going to be a fairly similar situation with the Amarok, but it'll be interesting. Things like the ability to have a pallet in the back of an Amarok, will that come in the Ranger? Probably not, maybe. I don't know, who knows. But it'll still have a diesel V6, because it's all but confirmed for the Ranger that it's going to have a diesel V6. So by extension, you would assume the Amarok will be in the same boat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if we're talking early 2022, potentially for next Ranger, you've got to think about Toyota, and they'll be heading down the hybrid path. You'd have to think so. The powertrain equation will be one that will be moved on as well by the time that car arrives, I'd say.
Yeah, I think a lot's going to change in the Ute powertrain field, if you will, in the next 2 years or so, with hybrid, plug-in hybrid.
Yeah.
Diesel V6s proliferating once more. It's going to be an interesting and pretty fun time, I think.
Okay, cool. But the Ranger, for the time being, is hanging in there well.
Yes.
So thank you, Tom. I will just finish off with the car I've been in the past week, which is the new Kia Sorento. And the one I've been driving is the Sport Diesel. So it's a 50K, it's a $51,500 proposition before you put it on the road. 2.2 litre turbo diesel, 148 kilowatts, 440 newton meters, which is pretty handy. And all of that from 1750 RPM, 8-speed auto, and of course 4-wheel drive. And there are so many pluses for this car. We've done the launch review, and I'm really starting to see the commentary and put it in context. It's such a slick design inside and out. It really does look good. I'm sure that's a subjective thing, and there'll be others that disagree, but broadly, the consensus has been that it is a good-looking car, and I totally agree. The 7 seats, that's been well thought through. It's comfortable. There's heaps of equipment in this car. It's not a small price, but you get pretty good value, I would argue. And practicality, heaps of storage and USBs and 12 volts, just that thoughtful kind of big cup holders, things that make it easier for a family to live in a car like that. Strong performance, really great safety, all of these things that it's got going for it. And then I started to think about the minus column. And look, the only things I could really put in there was that it's a pretty big beast. It's 1.9 tons. It's 4.8 meters long. So it's quite long. It's not immense, but it's quite long. And that can be tricky to park, particularly if you're nosing into a perpendicular spot. It can be hard to kind of line up the car accurately, but it's got a really good reversing camera, nice resolution, all of that. There are not a lot of negatives as far as I'm concerned. And if you were considering something like a 7-seat Prado, this car would be at a reasonable discount for an equivalently specified Toyota. I think it'd be an interesting equation that you'd be weighing up. Really, really good car. I think they've done a great job with it.
To that point about parking, though, I believe it's the GT line only. You do have that kind of summon feature that Tesla's had for a while now, and BMW and Audi, where you can, park it and get it to come out. So if you were in a bay that was very tight, because maybe people are hugging the lines either side, you can get it in and out in that regard. But it's interesting how it moves the game forward.
On that score, I'm totally with Hammer Rocks, who said if the parking space was that tight, there's no way I'd put the car in there. It's probably a factor that if you found yourself parked in, it's a great feature to be able to extract the car. Maybe more than slotting it into a very tight space. But point taken, it's got that as well. So I was super impressed for what it's worth. I think it's been said before, but it's possibly a turning point for Kia. That it really is a sign of maturity of the brand in terms of design and the way it's been executed. I think it's a terrific product.
I've hopped into one this week, and it's the absolute base model, and I've got to say it feels luxe. It is. Right. It's a really nice product to be a base model. I'm yet to sort of delve into price and spec and all that, but it seems lovely.
Yeah, and some of the styling touches, the treatments around the dash and doors, it's all adds some visual interest. And I know Richard called it out in his launch review. The AM station, when you're searching through for an AM station, it's old school valves that illuminate the numerals in the frequency that you're searching for. Just little touches like that really add to the experience. I enjoyed it thoroughly. But speaking of enjoying it thoroughly, it's time for MuskWatch. Okay, so let's kick it off. Of course, Elon's been on Twitter. He's rarely off Twitter. And he said, rewatched Young Frankenstein this weekend. Still awesome. Ovaltine, ? Now, that, for people who have watched Young Frankenstein, refers to what I would argue is one of the best scenes in one of the best movies ever made. It features Cloris Leachman and Gene Wilder, and we've got a little bit of vision of it for people who are watching on YouTube. But if you haven't seen the movie, I'd recommend it. And Rogue Cheddar said, Cloris Leachman was always an exquisite, consummate diamond in everything she did. And I think he's right. She's a great actor. But it put him also in mind of a Seinfeld exchange, which was Kenny Bania. And for anyone who's watched Seinfeld, they'll know Bania as the aspiring comic. And he says, why do they call it Ovaltine? The mug is round, the jar is round. They should call it Roundtine. That's gold, Jerry, gold. And but it's just such a great movie. Gene Wilder, Marty Feldman, Terry Garr, who is a very handsome individual, Madeline Kahn, Peter Boyle, Gene Hackman plays a cameo as a blind character, which is hilarious. And there was one other famous interchange where Frankenstein, who was Wilder, to Igor, who was Marty Feldman, says, look, I'm a very skilled doctor. Maybe I can help you with that hump. To which Igor says, what hump? And that's a constant kind of gift type meme out there. So I'm totally with the dear leader on that one. I think it's a brilliant film. And also, not just watching Young Frankenstein, he's been playing Call of Booty. He says, Call of Booty, great game, which I've discovered is available for the Xbox and PS4. Now, Jerica, who commented on this tweet, said, retro-style 2D platform game in which you play a health and safety inspector who must evade hordes of horny women who would have their way with you. Fast-paced, raunchy, multi-level action. And then finishes it with saying, just another day at the office. And Emma says, sometimes I really do wonder if Elon is okay. And I think it's fair enough, Emma, to have concern. But there has, surprise, surprise, been another leaked email inside Tesla. It's just extraordinary how these emails leak out of the organisation. But Elon sent an email to Tesla employees saying he has a goal of building 500,000 vehicles in 2020. So Tesla topped analyst expectations for production for the third quarter, and they delivered just under 140,000 vehicles for the third quarter. And that brings them to 330,000 cars year to date. So they need to produce 170,000 in the last quarter, which is a 17% increase on the last quarter to get to that 500,000. And the email says, it will be tough but super exciting if we can exceed 500,000 cars made in a single year for the first time in Tesla history. It all comes down to Q4. Please take whatever steps you can think of to improve output while increasing quality. So it's down to everyone in Tesla to somehow pump out an extra 17% out of the same facilities.
What about Elon, though? Shouldn't he be down there on the floor instead of watching movies and playing video games?
That's a great point. He should be on the camp bed in the wedding marquee like he was during production hell a couple of months ago. Yeah, I agree. That would be one move. Well said. So, but that brings us, pardon me, to the share price, which is $425.92. It was $429 last week. So it's been moving between this band of about $415 to $440 throughout the week. But I was interested to read a story on MarketWatch. Recently, they did the stock split, of course, a 5-for-1. So that's why the share price is appreciably lower than it has been. And MarketWatch contends that stock splits typically have a short-term focus to create interest and make the shares more affordable. And that means they become more attractive to kind of transient retail investors, maybe even Tesla owners that wanting to buy in the whole thing. But higher price shares attract more stable, long-term, institutional type investors who will stick with it for the longer term. And Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway is the gold standard in that regard. So they're seeing it as a fairly short-term, narrowly focused, let's just get the price up now type thing. So it'll be interesting to see if that holds true over time. But with that, I think we have reached the finish line. I want to say thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
And thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
And thanks to our champion of operational excellence, antisocial behaviour analyst, and nightclub eviction specialist, Mr. Pritchard, for his Never Say Die production wizardry. Today, he's wearing a t-shirt saying, also available in sober, Fruit Loops boxer briefs, and rare as hen's teeth Xanadu edition roller skates. Sam Toucan has never looked better, I've got to say. Now, please pass on the word about the podcast and let us know your thoughts by searching for CarsGuide on Facebook and Instagram using the hashtag CGPodcast, or email us at comments@carsguide.com.au. If you're an Apple podcast listener, please rate and review us. And remember, you can watch us on YouTube. But before we go, dropped in on a mate of mine this week, and he was on the speakerphone. First thing I heard him say was, I need to book a car service. Obviously, the dealer on the other end said, how about 10 tomorrow? To which my mate said, no, I don't need that many.